The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Connected Table Live. We are your hosts, Melanie Young and David Ransom, your insatiably curious culinary couple. Each week we bring you the dynamic people who work front and center and behind the scenes in food, wine, spirits, and hospitality. You can follow us anytime on iHeart.com and, of course, tweet us at The Connected Table and Facebook, theconnectedtable.com, to find out who we're talking to and who's coming up next. Speaking of, we've got two people on this show that really warm our hearts. The first is a cookbook author whose newest book is Soup for Two, small batch recipes for one, two, or a few, and we have been cooking from them to keep warm. And our next guest following her will be the king of coffee, Illy coffee, in fact, who's now delving into wine. So all of our favorite liquids in one show.
Isn't that the truth?
So Joanna Pruess is an award-winning food and travel writer who's written extensively for the New York Times Magazine, Washington Post, Saveur, Fine Cooking, Food and Wine, and she contributes regularly to Specialty Foods Magazine. She has written and published 14 cookbooks, is a fellow member of Les Dames d'Escoffier. In addition to her aforementioned Soup for Two, some of Joanna's other cookbooks include the Dos Caminos Tacos with Ivy Stark, the Tea Cookbook, another great beverage, the Cast Iron Cookbook, and Seduced by Bacon, recipes and more about America's favorite indulgence, one of David's popular ones. She also, yeah, right?
It's one of my weaknesses, I think, and passions in life is bacon, because everything's better with bacon.
So Joanna is a passionate traveler. She was the first director of the cooking studio at King Supermarket, and a good friend. Welcome.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, David.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, finally.
Oh, I agree. I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
I thought of you today, though. I actually had some pumpkin black bean soup in the refrigerator.
Oh, did you?
I love anything with pumpkin in it.
I do.
Goodness.
And, pumpkin seeds are really good. They're healthy.
Yeah.
But pumpkin soup is yummy. David, there's actually a little bit of bacon in it. Oh, dear.
So it's off the
there
table
you go.
for Melanie,
Yeah, it's good.
The saddest day of my life was when Melanie told me for the first time she wasn't going to eat bacon anymore.
I know. It's funny.
So.
You marry a foodie and you end up with a vegetarian. It's like, oh, my God. We have a big question for you because I'm always amazed. We are always amazed by anybody who writes a cookbook and creates recipes. How do you do it? What is the process of creating a recipe when there's so many out there? How do you keep your originality to yourself?
First of all, I'm really lucky because I've spent a lot of years developing recipes for a lot of gourmet takeout stores and a lot of clients. And so I'm always cooking and I'm always traveling. And I think I'm very fortunate. And the other thing is I'm very, very lucky is I get to go home with people. I was just in Ireland and I actually was in Ballymaloe, but I was in a wonderful restaurant in Dublin called Chapter One, and suddenly you're best friends with the chef and you're talking about ideas there. And I think that if you are very curious, as you both are, and you love to eat, that these flavors keep dancing on your tongue. And I think, as you said, I had a cooking school and had 15,000 students over the years. And I just kept developing recipes, and I met a lot of wonderfully talented cooks and chefs. And so somebody comes along. My mother made 1.5 pounds of bacon every day for her 5 kids and my dad.
Oh, that's a lot of bacon.
Yeah, and you know what? The point is she never had to set an alarm. We were always up. But I've been developing recipes over so many years that when somebody said, well, what do you do with bacon? And it went from the most provincial, my mom's mac and cheese with bacon, and then I did pecan brown sugar and bacon ice cream, and I was doing a television show, and people were fighting. I was supposed to be there for 3 minutes. I was there for 7, and they were still fighting about it. So I love to push the parameters. I love to see what food does, and I was not born Italian. I was not born French. I've lived in a lot of countries. So I love to mix flavors, and I love to mix techniques. And so that's what happens.
What I find interesting about your story, Joanna, is that you didn't grow up and become a restaurant chef and then create a cookbook on recipes that you had for your restaurant. Recipes and cookbooks are your business, so it's a different road that you travel to get to having your cookbook be published, and that's interesting to me because there's you're not the only one that does that. There are a few that are out there that are like you that are in the recipe and the cookbook business as somebody
like Michelle
who cooks.
Ciccalone and other people, yeah.
But you're not necessarily somebody who's a chef that says, "Oh, let me put out a cookbook."
That is exactly right. And I would think that anybody who's been in my kitchen says, "Oh, you're so approachable." I really love to share with kids. I taught classes for the blind, the deaf, the learning disabled. I taught in inner city schools. I taught in the prison system. I think food is really a source of communication and love. And I think that if you can share basic techniques with people, they will get gratification from it. It's not that it has to be a 3-star chef recipe. And that's what I'm about. I know a lot of techniques. I am not against using very high-quality convenience foods. I do it in the soup book. I think it's important that people learn that the food that they are creating is for their palate. The chef is not in the kitchen with you, and even the author. The author, when we write a book, we're giving you a guideline. But really, you have to decide if you want less salt, more chili powder. It's really for you. So I think
that's really where tasting as you go along comes in handy because everybody's palate is different. When you make a recipe, that doesn't mean it's not up for interpretation by the person who buys the book and then cooks that recipe.
I so agree with you, David, and that's really what I was saying in Soup for Two. You can have leftovers up the yin-yang in your refrigerator, and a lot of them become wonderful soups. And I think that's the wonderful thing about cooking for 2 or 4 is that you don't need giant quantities. I don't have a lot of people to cook for. In years gone by, I had a family and all of their friends, and they were athletic, and so I would make giant quantities of split pea soup or minestrone. But I don't want to eat it all the time, and I don't have the freezer space to freeze it. So I know that I pick up convenience foods. I will go to supermarkets and I'll buy cut-up vegetables in the salad bar. You have to look pretty carefully at what you're buying. But you can create some wonderful soups without a lot of work. And I think that's where grocers have come to our aid these days. They sell cut-up vegetables. They bunch together aromatics. You can buy an onion, a carrot, and a celery or a parsnip in one package. And in days gone by, you'd have to buy a pound of carrots or whatever. So, and
that's actually a really good point because my mom is a newly single. Well, she's widowed. And she complained to me that cooking and shopping for food is really difficult because everything's in large quantities and she's one person. And she finds things go to waste or she has to freeze it. And one of the great things, and that's also the same with a lot of recipes and cookbooks, particularly chef-driven cookbooks. It's for a larger number of people. What's nice about Soup for Two is it's just that. It's for 1 to 2 people, and you don't have all this excess. But that said, when we did make our Soup for Two, I said it was Soup for 2 days because we just kept adding to it.
Oh, that's true. That's fun. But the other thing is, and I've said to people a couple things. One, it is far easier if you happen to be a foursome to double a recipe for 2 than it is to try and cut down a large recipe for 12.
So true.
It certainly is. It certainly is. It's much easier to add to it and double it than it is to have it.
Yeah, and the other thing I tried to do in this book is if I, for example, use fennel, and it says a half a bulb of fennel, I've tried to be very meticulous about giving another recipe with fennel so that you don't end up with so you make 2 different recipes within a day or 2 of each other. I think that's important as more and more people are twosomes, And they're twosomes as they're just starting out. They're twosomes at another stage in their life where they have either lost their partner through divorce or widowhood or whatever, or they never became more than a twosome or a onesome. But I think that that's a sector of the market that we really have to honor, that we also want to eat well. And, you know, if you buy, there are some very good packaged spice blends these days that don't have MSG in them. I tell people all the time, please read the labels. But there's better aseptically packaged stocks. You can. I tell people how to embellish them to make it more fragrant. But I even give a recipe for using a whole chicken that you cut up, and you get 4 or 5 different recipes out of it, because I don't like to waste, and I don't think any of us do today. And we need diversity in our menus, and we want healthy food.
You know, it's funny you talk about stocks and things like that, and you know, one of the things that I always do as a cook, and I cook for 2. It's Melanie and myself in the house, and when I cook, Melanie used to say, "What's this green jar in the refrigerator?" And I said, "Oh, that's the spinach water left over from steaming the spinach last night. We'll use that later on down the road." And I learned that from my mom, who used to say, who never threw a thing out when I was growing up, you know. And not only that, to the point where she had a bowl in the back of the refrigerator there. She'd throw all the tiny leftover hunks of cheese, and then a month later we'd have fondue on the table, things like that.
There you
but
go.
she always saved things like the spinach water, the kale water, the broccoli water, whatever it was, whatever she was steaming, she'd put it in a jar and use it in either a soup or a stock or something.
Yeah.
Before, of course, it started.
That's brilliant. Well, the other thing is
that was always happening in our household.
Yeah, and if you, for example, soak dried mushrooms, I mean, that's like an elixir. You soak the mushrooms, and then you strain the liquid, and you can boil that down. You can put it in the microwave and reduce it down to just like a brown gold that you just add, and it pops up the flavors fabulously. You know, one of the things I did in Soup for Two that I think is pretty good for home cooks is that I've given some special kinds of garnishes. There's some fabulous, I don't know if you guys have tried the crunchy chickpeas. Those are addictive.
As a matter of fact.
Okay.
Yeah, my personal favorite snack ever.
Yeah. But there's also like Parmesan cheese discs that you could put in. And you can make something very simple and add one garnish, and it just makes it a celebration. And I think that's really important in our food. Is in general, you know, we don't generally, if we're 1 or 2, want to make a grand formal meal, but we do eat with our eyes first, and we are seduced by the flavors. And if it appeals to our senses even before we taste it, you're more than halfway there.
So true. I eat with my eyes and my nose because scent is very important to me.
Of course.
I have a very heightened sense of smell. And one of the things I love is that you just change a dish by adding a different ingredient or a different spice. And you can, like as another fellow cookbook author said, Karen Page, you can eat yourself around the world with the same simple ingredients. And that's
absolutely.
really
and she did a brilliant book.
Yes, she did.
Yeah,
she did. She did.
Well.
So what are the essential kitchen tools you need in a small kitchen to make soup?
Now, I have a blender. I have a blender and I have a food processor. A lot of people also like immersion stick blenders. But the difference between a food processor and a blender is if you want a very smooth soup, you would use a blender because it has to do with the rotation of the blades and the shape of the bottle, of the jar. A blender, a food processor, you can get it smooth, but not as silky smooth. And so you would use them for different purposes. And I also, for years, never used, when I moved back from Paris, I wasn't going to get a Cuisinart. Oh, my. I'd gone to cooking school. We did it all by hand. And then I had 3 kids in a year and a half. And I said, oops. And basically what happened is my blender got left in the back of the cupboard. And then all of a sudden I'm finding that a blender is just so useful, and it's the right size for this size recipe. I also use, a couple of 2.5 quart saucepan, a 5-quart saucepan. You do not need giant stock pots because you're not making, you're not going to end up with that, and it'll cook off too fast if it's just very wide and very shallow. I use strainers, obviously, and scrapers. And I do love a vegetable peeler. There are certain brands I love. I like my microplane. Obviously a couple of knives. I really am a minimalist when it comes to equipment, and that has been my mark all the way through. Even though I've had cooking schools and I've worked in big kitchens, I don't think we need that many gadgets.
I agree with you.
I think that it's certainly a culture that's wonderful to have all these things, but I don't think we need so much. Queen Victoria said, "Food tastes better in small houses." That's just a wonderful quote when she was in the Isle of Skye, of course, with her huge family. But everything is relative. She also went back to the palace.
But food always tastes better when you're in the country of origin too. When you're traveling, right?
Yeah, I think that there is something about terroir. And, you at some point you asked me, how do I get inspiration? And if I go to Istanbul, for example, and I've spent a great deal of time there, and I fall in love with dishes like what's called iman bialdi. Do you know that dish? It's an eggplant dish, and it was apparently the imam, the holy man, fainted because it had so much olive oil and it was so delicious. It was just it's a lovely dish. Anyway, it's one of my favorites. But I decided to make iman bialdi soup. I figured, okay, this is something I love. The other one I love is Circassian chicken, and this Circassian chicken is usually made with chicken breasts and shredded with walnuts, and it's a room temperature dish. And the term Circassian chicken, apparently the Sultan went and stole the women with the fairest skins and their breasts from behind the Caucasus, so they were the Circassians, and they were brought back to his harem. So anyway, I made Circassian chicken. You talk about something you can put into you can change a soup out. I made meatballs that were seasoned with sort of Middle Eastern spices and simmered in a chicken broth. And so, while I'm certainly not a purist. I did go to cooking school, and I did some classic dishes, but I love the experimenting process. When I came back from Spain, I brought back ajo blanco, the famous white garlic soup.
Amazing.
That we did with almonds, and I'm a collector of food facts and history, and I love to talk about those because I think that food is really a mirror of a culture. So that, once you understand what's going on in the culture, and as I said, we can go back to Istanbul, but when the Ottoman Empire I guess it was 1542 came into being and Constantinople became Istanbul, all of a sudden, Suleiman is sending his viziers both all the way to Italy and all the way east to Asia, and his people brought back cooking techniques from wherever they went to. And they also took ingredients from Istanbul or that area and brought it west and brought it east. So you have this constant overlay of both techniques and of ingredients going back and forth. And I do love that. So you can't say a culture has only got this particular ingredient, like tomatoes, for example. We never had tomatoes. I mean, Europe never had tomatoes until they came back from the New World.
Right.
I just want to point out you're a cultural and culinary anthropologist, and you lecture about this, which is why your knowledge, as you just talked, is so deep. Just to let our listeners know that you've lectured at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington and aboard Crystal Cruises, and you're a student, you're a teacher, and you're always a student as well, because that's just the way life is. Are there any parts of the world that you haven't been yet that you want to explore?
Oh, tons. Tons. I mean, I have not. I haven't been nearly enough in Asia. I've been in South America, but there's more places I want to go in South America. I've spent a great deal of time in France and Italy and Turkey, and interestingly enough, in Finland, which I think is a fascinatingly interesting culture. But Well, it's interesting because everybody goes, oh, Finland. There's all these other Scandinavian countries, but Finland. Finland is where we got Marimekko and Alvar Aalto, and the design aesthetic is totally a reflection of all the wood that's there, all the ice that's there. The smoking, we get tons of smoked foods from Finland. I once had tar ice cream. It's a distillate of pine.
Tar ice cream, wow.
Yeah, it's not nearly as awful as you would think it would be, but can go to.
We've seen pine in dishes though in restaurants and things like that. I remember going to Wiley Dufresne's great restaurant WD-50 down in the Lower East Side a number of years ago, and he was using a pine. He was doing a pine broth, and I looked on the menu and I said, this can't be true, and then the dish came out and it was wonderful.
Well, exactly, and. Back to what Melanie said, when you are in a country, I was in Finland. I'm in the dead of winter, but also in the summer at midsummer night when you have all these fresh strawberries. It's like your mouth is exploding with strawberries. Yeah. And I, on the other hand, went up to Finnish Lapland, and I had what they call Finnish stew. It was made with reindeer, and all the ingredients were frozen reindeer, a handful of snow, and maybe a little salt in the pot.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, that was not high on my list of great ingredients. But
what does reindeer taste like?
Hopefully they skinned the reindeer first.
Oh, you know what, reindeer? Well, I did write a book about wild game, so venison.
Yes.
And it's a very good source of protein. Venison has the same nutritional profiles as boneless, skinless chicken breast.
Yes,
it's really and we are going to see more and more game eaten because I think it's the food is healthy, it's tasty, and it's just if we would get, and our ancestors ate all this stuff. You ate what you shot or trapped or whatever, and I think that a lot of chefs and home cooks want to use what they acquire, and I think that's a very important thing to recognize. But I think that we tend to, this is just a personal opinion, if for some people they want to go to their supermarket and have it wrapped in plastic. And when I used to say I was doing venison cooking, people would get very upset, and also I cook with rabbit, and people would say, oh, Bambi, Thumper. And so this is, it's a little, anyway. So, all of those things by the by, whether I have lamb sausages with white bean soup, they all end up in my cooking, and I think that I'm lucky that way because I get to experiment and then I get to share with friends, which is what I'm doing.
Well, you've written 14 books, and they're all very different. When you look at, you've written about game, and you've written about tacos, and you've written about bacon, you've written about Italian, and, a lot. If you have 14 babies, which of these were your biggest labor of love?
No. It's like saying which of my 3 kids is my favorite.
I know.
And I think you know, too, and I think you know the answer to this. I fall madly in love with my projects. I just go completely berserk about them. And I fall madly in love with the people that I get the chance to work with. I've known the Harney family for, 30-something years. And so John, the late John Harney, great man, was always sending me tea. And then I started cooking with tea a lot, and I kept saying, and then suddenly I see all these chefs are making Earl Grey creme brulee, and I'm making...
And tea smoked this and tea smoked that.
Well, and tea smoked this and tea smoked that, David, has been going on for thousands of years in China.
Exactly, sure.
So, what's old is new again, and vice versa. But I think that we are open to new ideas. I did a green tea mousse with ginger on the front of my tea book, and people go, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" And now green tea is everywhere. You're seeing matcha this, matcha that, and I think that's great. I think that I was having known the Harneys for so many years. I know that they were really innovators and purists at bringing a lot of this stuff to the American market, but the American market has become, thanks to the specialty food industry, I would say, much more educated and more receptive to new ideas. But
and also food availability, as well. And I just want to point out the name of the book that we're discussing is called Eat Tea, A New Approach to Flavoring Contemporary and Traditional Dishes.
Right.
Right? Yeah,
Right.
which is really, really interesting. Yeah.
And the one that came out after is called Harney and Sons Tea Cookbook. So they both have the same. The thing that's so interesting, though, is back to what David said, that we are experimenting. You're willing to put more stuff into your mouth. We are appreciating spicier flavors, more diverse flavors. But we're also becoming more demanding on one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, sadly enough, people are eating more and more junk. I don't care what we're saying about it. There's an awful lot of food that we could get rid of in our diet.
Totally.
Well, there certainly is.
A lot of GMO.
A lot of junk. Absolutely.
Yeah,
so I have a question. Is there anything you just will not eat?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I will always try something. I don't like the texture of sea slugs at all. I mean, here I am. I'm one of 5 kids, and we were invited to a lunch by the first advisor to then King Saud. And the first course my mother made us, she did a really fast Emily Post. She said, you have to eat everything that's served to you. And the first course was sheep's eyes.
Oh.
And I don't know how 5 or 6 of us finessed that, but that wasn't. It went on to meatballs, which was a whole lot more palatable.
I think that would have fallen into my napkin, and I would have asked to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, that's the old napkin drag.
Well, I mean, that is the napkin thing, and the problem is when you're trying to be really on your best behavior, and the napkin is probably some really expensive damask napkin.
Right.
And you're 16 years old and you don't know what the heck you're doing. It's pretty funny. But no, I mean, I've been so lucky because I grew up in a family that traveled. My mom was a State Department hostess. So we met people, and one of the earliest dishes I remember making, I've always had this ability to mix different cultures. One of the first dishes that I thought was pretty interesting is I made curried scallops, and I wrapped them in phyllo, and then I put snow peas on them and drizzled them with goma with black sesame seeds. And people thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. It's a mixture. But I don't know if you know this, my first career I was a fashion designer, and my specialty was I did leather and suede design. And I did a collection of leather with chiffon and suede with jersey. And so I got some really good press on it in Vogue magazine, at some of the top stores, and because it was breaking barriers long before. I mean, today anything goes. But I think the same thing holds true. There's a good and bad of it, and that is you can combine whatever you want, and I think it's a good topic for conversation. You can combine anything you want, and as I said earlier, it is your own mouth that is the determinant. But I think that sometimes we put too much in stuff, and sometimes we put weird, or some chefs put weird just for the sake of weird. And I think that's not my, do you agree with that?
Well, I think simplicity still has to be a key ingredient in creating your ingredient list because, you never want to, as so many people always say, especially in the cocktail industry and the spirits industry, et cetera, if something gets too muddled with too many different flavors, then it becomes not enjoyable because you're sitting there trying to decipher what you're eating the entire time, and then you don't have time to enjoy it. So I think you're right to a lot of it, to a certain extent on that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that you don't want to cancel out all the flavors. I think if you've got really good ingredients, you want to celebrate the ingredients. And, I mean, they used to tell us in France that a lot of these sauces came because, or people told us about the French, that they invented sauces to hide bad flavors in meat. So.
Well, and spices too, I think, as well.
Oh, yeah.
When they were,
absolutely.
Especially, when the wagon trains were heading west back in the 1800s and there was no refrigeration and everything was baking in the sun, they were certainly preserving with spices and using fat and things like that to create a barrier between the air and the meat, et cetera. So, sure, absolutely.
There's no question about it. And we're talking about confit because confit was preserving something in its own fat before you had refrigeration. I just made a confit of duck. 3 Cheers to D'Artagnan. They have you can buy duck confit, and I got a couple of leg thigh combinations and took off the skin and shredded the duck meat along with some jalapenos and some cilantro and a little bit of cheese, and I put them between two flour tacos, and then I made an avocado salsa with bell peppers and more jalapenos, but it was unbelievably delicious. But that's duck confit. So I will tell you my duck confit story, and that is that you ended up with the skin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so do I have a minute to tell you about my duck confit? No.
Ooh, our next guest just called in from Italy. So
oh, good. Okay, so why don't you go talk to your next guest, because tell him I love his coffee.
You know, we'd love to have you tell everybody how they can find you on whatever social media or website that you have as well, and then maybe at some point we can have you come back and we can talk about things that we didn't talk about, like the cast iron cookbook, which is
I would love to. And when you guys want to know how to repair yours, either get my cast iron cookbook, or I will send you the instructions. I am on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, Joanna Pruess, Twitter, Joanna Pruess. I'm on Instagram, and I have a website under construction, which will be joannapruess.com.
And that's JoannaPruess for people who can't spell. How's that?
That's great, Melanie. I thank you. I thank you both. It's so much,
Joanna,
it's so much fun to talk to you.
Pleasure.
It's been so great having you on, and we look forward to doing it again sometime.
I'd love it. Thanks a million.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that was just a wonderful conversation with Joanna Pruess. She's such a great cookbook author and so much fun to chat with, and so knowledgeable about everything. It's just always a joy. It really
makes me want to go on a trip with her. Now, speaking of trip, we're traveling to Italy now. And our next guest is calling in from Italy. Boy, if you love coffee, you'll know this man's name, because his family has been in the coffee business, as well as now other parts, such as chocolate and tea and now wine, since 1933. We're going to be speaking with Ricardo Illy, who is chairman of Gruppo Illy S.p.A. His grandfather, Francesco Illy, founded the business in 1933, starting with a coffee and chocolate back in a farm near Trieste, which at the time was part of Yugoslavia, was part of Italy, I apologize, and it later became Yugoslavia. And I believe he's calling from that area. He is now chairman, and he's deeply involved in a lot of exciting new initiatives that Illy is doing. And of course, Illy is synonymous with a great cup of coffee in hundreds of restaurants around the world and over 200 cafes. Ricardo Illy, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Or buongiorno.
Or
buonanotte. Buonanotte. Where are you calling us from?
We would say buonasera. It's not yet notte. It's only 8 p.m., let's say, in Italy, and I'm calling from Torino, where our chocolate company is based.
Sure. Well, welcome to the show, and we're so delighted to have you here. You know, Melanie and I have known about your coffee products for years and years and years and years, and have been big fans of Illy Coffee for so long. It's so nice to finally have you on our show to talk about your coffee, your company, what you all do, and your passion for it. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Well, Ricardo, we actually also had the pleasure of meeting Ernesto Illy, your father, correct?
Correct. It was my father.
Well, Illy was a long-time sponsor, has been a long-time sponsor of the James Spirit Awards, which is how I got to know your company. Yours is a family business. It has a long history, both pre- and post-World War II. Tell us a little bit about it and how it has, how under you it has changed, but how really the origins of it being a family business.
My grandfather, Francesco, started the business in 1933, producing coffee and also chocolate as well.
Yes.
And he owned a farm in the region Istria, right aside Trieste, where he started the coffee and chocolate business, where he planted fruit trees, and his idea was to later on produce jams. So 3 products at the very beginning.
And then since that time, since after your grandfather, your father Ernesto Illy took over, correct? And he was in charge for many, many years.
Correct. After the Second World War, my grandfather decided to stop the production of cocoa. There were no cocoa on the market, and so he stopped the chocolate production. And Istria, the region, became Yugoslavia, and so the communist government of Yugoslavia nationalized the farm. So the farm also was gone. He continued only with coffee, and in 1956 he died, and my father Ernesto took over, and he continued just producing coffee for many years, and he developed research, and he focused on quality, and then he decided to go in foreign markets. In 1980 he arrived in the United States, and I entered the company in 1977. And later on, I decided to propose a diversification in the production, and this happened in 2004.
Well, it's a wonderful story, and you know what I find interesting is that you really worked your way up through the company. It wasn't even though your father was chairman of the company, you didn't start at the top. You basically started at the bottom, and you worked your way up to get to where you are, which is now chairman of the company. What is it that sets in your mind Illy apart as a coffee company from so many of the other coffees that are out there? It's a wonderful product. But you guys are very, very diligent about the level of quality that goes into every jar and can of Illy that you make. What sets it apart in your eyes?
I would say that our secret is very simple. We are just devoted to the quality of coffee, and we decided, it was my very first proposal to my father when I entered the company in 1977, to produce only the best. That means only one blend. So we are the sole roasting company, I think worldwide. I never met another one up till now, producing only one blend, only the best. And already my grandfather was devoted to espresso, and my father produced and even focused on the espresso, developing a system, first of all with paper pots and now also with capsules, to facilitate the production of the espresso for the consumers, but also for hotel, restaurant, and cafes.
Which is now a global empire, and Illy is synonymous with phenomenal coffee. But also under your leadership, you have expanded into some other areas, such as chocolate, back into tea and wine. Do you want to talk about that?
We are now distributed in about 145 countries. We are almost global. And in 2004, we decided that to allow also our sons and grandsons to grow the company, to start the diversification. So first of all, we went back to chocolate, and we acquired Domori, the company which is based here in Torino. And then we went back to tea that my father produced for about 20 years. So we own a French company called Daman Frère. And we also needed to develop the gems project of our grandfather. So we have a stake of 40% of Agrimontana, which is a company also based in Piemonte, in the northwest of Italy, producing gems. And finally, we had also to go back to agriculture, and we arrived in Tuscany.
Well, and in Tuscany, you're talking about your winery, your property in Montalcino, the Mastroianni Brunello di Montalcino that you all make, which is a wonderful product. And we've been to Montalcino. It's a great place. If you're going to be in Tuscany, you might as well be there. So good job picking that as your destination when you thought about that. Tell us a little bit about getting involved in Mastroianni. It's really one of your most recent projects. You've owned the winery since 2008. So you've really only even got a couple of vintages under your belt because they don't release for 4 years. Tell us about how you became involved with Mastroianni and what it means to you.
It's a very strange story, and it was my elder brother Francesco. We are 3 brothers, 1 sister, and our mother is also part of the company. And Francesco knew Mastroianni wines, went once to Tuscany, to Montalcino, and visited only one winery. By chance, it was Mastroianni. Later on, Sandro Chia, the Italian painter that lives normally in New York, helped Francesco in acquiring a land and a house, and by chance this land is right aside Mastroianni. So he became a good friend of the managing director of Mastroianni, and a few years later the founder died, and Francesco told us, why don't we buy the winery? It's a good occasion to go back to our agricultural roots, let's say, because our grandfather was also a farmer, but also a good occasion to look at the long-term future, because the wine sector, especially the top-quality wine, is growing fast, and the Italian wines, in particular, Brunello of Montalcino, is so well known almost worldwide.
Well, it certainly is now, absolutely. Yeah.
And so we did the acquisition in 2008.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Montalcino has certainly become, I'd say, probably the hottest winemaking region in Italy over the last 15 years or so.
It's hard to get wine there, land there to build.
Well, that's true, Melanie. They've actually maxed out on the amount of acreage you could devote to Sangiovese Grosso to make Brunello di Montalcino. So, so it's interesting, and it's good for you, Ricardo, that you were able to get in kind of underneath the ceiling like at that point.
A good neighbor policy. Yeah. They say good fences make good neighbors. In this case, it was just handy that you were right next to a place and an opportunity. Pets. Now, the winemaker is still there, the general manager, correct?
Correct. We follow this policy as far as it is possible. We keep the previous management of possibly even the owner. So, in the case of Illy Cafe, it's my younger brother Andrea, who is the chairman of the company. In the chocolate company, it is the founder, which is now the chairman, Mr. Gianluca Franzoni. And at Damman Frère, the tea company, it is also the previous owner and chairman of the company, which is chairing the company. And so in Mastroianni, the managing director is still the same, and all the people we found, we kept them. The estate is really in a wonderful place. We think that the wines are pretty good. We really love them. And we also found wonderful people, so we kept all of them working with us and developing the winery. We made quite important investments in the vineyards, in the cellar. We built a new part of the cellar in bioarchitecture, and so we are still improving the quality of the wines.
Well, it's a wonderful brand. I've known the brand for a number of years, so it's nice to see that somebody has actually taken the brand and really embraced it that way and decided that they wanted to keep it on the path that it was and create new opportunities for it at the same time. I see that in the wine business much more often these days. I think even though a company will come in and buy a property, they're not necessarily bringing in an entire new team to run it for them these days, because they realize that the people that have been there are the ones that are most really beneficial to them at that time, because they really know how the property runs and how the grapes grow and things like that. So it's obviously, especially in the wine business, to their benefit to do so. So congratulations to you for really trying to keep everything in place as you took it over.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about coffee again, because, as there's so many coffees on the market these days, and coffee has become such a huge industry, particularly here in the U.S., I think, with the advent of places like Starbucks and things like that. There's a coffee shop on every corner.
Cold brew method.
In Europe, I kind of think that's always been that way. You can always pop anywhere and get an espresso and have a quick cup of coffee. Yeah. Particularly in Italy, of course. But in the U.S., it wasn't always so. How do you think it's changed in the U.S. that we've started to embrace coffee culture as they have in Europe? And what do you think that means for Illy?
I think that in the United States, a few decades ago, there were a sole way to drink a cup of coffee. It was with the filter system of preparation cups, or with a big cup, and it was only a kind of beverage. And then the Italians, and Illy Cafe as well, brought the espresso system preparation. So this became a second way of drinking coffee, espresso and cappuccino, and all the different preparations that are based on the espresso. And later on, ready-to-drink coffee arrived, and we are also part of this program with the Coca-Cola company. We prepare a special, let's say, cold or iced coffee, which is canned by the Coca-Cola company. And recently, it is becoming a kind of fashion, let's say, drinking iced coffee. And we think that whatever the system, if you drink a good cup of coffee, it's always a pleasure, and it also benefits your health. Of course, we, being Italian, we prefer the espresso preparation. This is for us the top. But maybe also in Italy we are learning to drink coffee in different ways, like the filter coffee.
Well, you know, I grew up in the South, and coffee was a cup of coffee. You know, you had it in the morning, and it was usually instant. And I'll never forget going to Italy with my dad, it was morning, and he said to the hotel, "I'll have a cup of coffee." And, of course, they brought him an espresso, and he belted out, "You call this a cup of coffee? Where's the rest of it?" So there are a lot of people throughout the United States who still think a cup of coffee should be in a big mug, and they don't quite get espresso. Despite all the Starbucks that seem to be on every corner these days. Do you ever go into Starbucks?
Yes, it happened to me sometimes. I think that Starbucks is an excellent retailer. They are offering many products, not only coffee, in their shops, and it is a very pleasant place to be. And by the way, Starbucks is also, let's say, our partner in a consortium that we founded a few years ago to develop the system with the paper pods we call the easy serving espresso. So the acronym is EASY. And they also entered the consortium to develop this system.
That's great, because, you know, espresso is getting more popularity. I recently learned that actually a cup of espresso has less caffeine in it than a full cup of coffee. So many people in the nutrition world suggest drinking espresso. Instead, if you have to make choices, drink more espresso. And, of course, as you probably read, the U.S. dietary guidelines came out a week and a half ago and recommends 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day for your health.
Yes, that's right. Personally, I drink 2 to 3 cups a day, normally of espresso. Espresso contains less caffeine, first of all, because you use a smaller quantity of coffee, about 7 grams to prepare a cup, compared to about 10 grams of a filter coffee in the big mug. And then, being so concentrated, the quantity of caffeine that will be diluted in the water will be only 1 part of the caffeine that is present in the coffee itself. So finally, you will get only about 17 milligrams of caffeine in your cup. And then it has to be said that the percentage of caffeine that each of us will metabolize in 1 hour is quite different. So I know several people that can drink 5, even 10 cups per day, and they are perfectly healthy, and they feel very well drinking maybe 10 cups a day. And for me, the ideal quantity is 2 to 3. So what is saying the scientific research is, let's say, an average. But we have to take into account that every person has a different attitude in metabolizing caffeine.
Sure.
Well, we agree with that, and we're about to run out of time here. We want to. Obviously you make coffee at home. How do you like to enjoy your coffee, and what do you like to enjoy with your coffee?
I enjoy coffee with the espresso preparation, and let's say that the secret I follow is to first let flow some water, just water, in the cup, so the machine will perfectly clean up and the cup will heat. And then I put the capsule or the coffee in the machine, and I finally prepare the espresso that will flow in the very warm cup, and this will give you a perfectly clean in the flavors and perfectly hot espresso, and I will enjoy drinking it.
It sounds fantastic. I'm like, wow, it's getting toward 3 o'clock here. It's coffee break time. And I also want to know I learned also from Illy, very, very clean, pure water is important. Distilled water, correct?
Correct. The quality of water is also important. Better if it is spring water with a certain content of minerals, of calcium, but not too much. So it has not to be, let's say, a too hard water. So the content of calcium should be moderate.
Well, Ricardo Illy, we're going to wrap it up now. We want to thank you for taking the time to call us from Italy, and we wish you a buona sera. And for anyone who wants more, Illy has a fantastic Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, Illy USA, Facebook.com Illy, and Instagram Illy._coffee. Thank you very much for joining us. The toast to you.
Thank you, and buona sera, everybody.
Buona sera, Ricardo.
Buona sera.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and we hope to do it again sometime.
We are the Connected Table. We want to thank you for joining us. You can listen live every Wednesday, and of course, always find us on iHeart.com under Shows and Personalities. Have a delicious week. Thank you.